what role do you see for females in overcoming this crisis? What role do you see for women?
Well, if we count inside the G20, G20 is born as a multilateral answer for the 2008 crisis. Women counts in the G20 2.6 billion women. Mm-hmm. In between them, there is 247 million women already trained with university level, and they are out of the task force. If women are included in the same conditions than males, is according with World Bank statistic, the GDP could increase about 26% by 2025. So women has a very important role to play in the globalization and also in the well-being of the world.
And a related question for you, Constance. What do you recommend as female leaders to influence with our voice the dangerous developments that you've talked about?
Well, I'm not so sure that it, in this particular field, makes such a difference that we're women. I mean, right now I think we respond as human beings and as citizens. But I will say I was for 5 years the chairwoman of WISE Germany, Women in International Security, an association of women working in the international security field, from ministries to the media to NGOs. And I took that very seriously as a way of empowering and training particularly younger women who are moving into the field and who encounter all the usual obstacles and vertical hierarchies and attitudes, etc., that I don't have to tell you about. And I guess what I would recommend is that you look around you and see what you can do to protect particularly women in your field, to make sure that their voice is heard and that they're not disempowered. As we know, there's a great deal to do there.
And what's the attitude of the younger generation towards the tribal world? Who'd like to take that on?
I think, this question, we spend a lot of time talking about, what is the millennial approach to politics or to, in our workplaces. I know all of us who are not millennials, right, spend a lot of time discussing the challenges of managing, a group that really comes at it from a different perspective. What you have, I think, is part of the alienation in not just the United States, but in many of the Western industrialized societies between a new generation and an older system and an older set of voters. Everybody is familiar at this point with the idea that in Brexit, for example, it was an overwhelming Remain vote from younger voters, and it was really driven, the outcome was driven by that generation gap and by older voters. And that same was true in the United States, where Trump's disapproval ratings are enormous among younger voters of all political parties across the spectrum. And so you have gaps in societies that seem to be cultural as much as they are ideological, between the generations. And I think that's part of the fragmenting, the fracturing, and the increased stress level that we're feeling in our democracies is because you have a politics that doesn't work for a new group of people who are looking for something different, who have bought into that globalization consensus, who have bought into the idea that there is a new diverse and integrated world that they want to be a part of. And my fear is that whether it's 4 years or 8 years of America withdrawing its leadership from the world scene, that starts to exacerbate those divisions. I think this, call it populism, call it aggressive nationalism, whatever you want to call it, the signature of it as a political movement is to increase conflict, division, and fragmentation in the world.
Keep in mind, too, that the single most important determinant of someone who voted for Trump was education level. So it cuts across, you know, if the traditional alliances broke down in pretty dramatic fashion during the election. So you had blue-collar, you know, ex-steel workers in the heartland who had always voted Democratic that voted for Trump. You had, you know, people of Jewish faith who in the past would have you know, they were split, right? So in some cases they went for Trump, but the singular, you know, issue was education. So to the degree we educate our youth, that we actually make available good opportunities, I think that creates at least some path forward, and women in particular, because here again, you know, in the U.S. we're quite fortunate that over 50% of college students are women, but that's not true in other geographies. So there are plenty of places where women still have deficits in terms of their availability of education and opportunity.
That goes back, I think, to Susan's point about the social breakdowns.
Yeah, let us leave United States point of view, because the worldwide millennials are more green friendly. They are more focused in technology. They do their homework before they buy. They are more accurate when they buy something. And they look after the fair trade. They look after the equality for women and men. So I really trust in how they are facing the future of work. So Trump can have all the policies he wants, but he cannot stop what millennials are looking for, that which is the green world. Despite he leave the Paris Agreement, the population is pursuing that. So I think I'm very, very confident about the future with the millennials.
You said we'd end on an optimistic note.
Wait, we're not ending yet.
I would fully agree with that.
But that is...
I think that the younger people that I come into contact with are fully buying into a multilateral approach. Problems like climate change are just too big, you know, to be, you know, solved by individual states, actors, and so forth. So, it's a basic human need to want to belong to a tribe. So I think some form of tribalism is normal and is fine, but let's, you know, ensure that when it's combined with a proper view towards multilateral solutions, this is a good way forward.
Now, I don't want to work against my own strategy, but I have seen surveys that also suggest that millennials are less interested in politics. And even I think at one point there was some possibly a Harvard study that suggested that they don't mind authoritarian governments.
Then it must be true, of course. But seriously, I think we should, at the risk of pouring a little bit of vinegar into the wine here, I think we should be worried also that this generation, which I think, unlike all of us on the panel, has grown up with the sort of supreme confidence in the immediate accessibility of information and goods, and no obstacles to that for them, has very little practical idea of how laborious and painstaking it is to broker compromises in representative democracy, because what they think of as their birthright is the complete mobility of goods, ideas, data, and themselves. Yeah. And I think that if they are disaffected and alienated from the world that we have to some degree co-created, that is to some degree our fault. But I think we need to make sure that this generation understands that this system is indeed the one that produces the maximum of best possible outcomes for a maximum number of people, and that it needs to be preserved and that they need to be a part of that. And I think we need to discuss that at sort of national level before we talk about great multilateral projects.
Good point.
And just, Rula, to pick up on your point, what you're referring to are, in fact, a series of disturbing studies that go to Constanza's point as well, which suggests that not just in the United States, but across the Western world, one of the things you've seen among millennials is a decline in overall support for democracy. It's not support for authoritarianism, but what it is a decline in the poll findings that do you believe that democracy is the best form of government? Yeah. And again, it's not like a cliff, but it is a steady downward trajectory. If you combine this with the fact that the group Freedom House annually produces its index of freedom in the world, that index has been going down for 12 straight years. And what you've seen, if you combine those two things, is both facts on the ground shifting and the political basis for democracy shifting at exactly the moment when you're looking at, in a geopolitical sense, a new set of conflicts between authoritarianism and democracy, between great powers, Russia and China, reasserting not only their place at the global leadership table, but saying we want to revise the terms on which the international order is based. At a time when the West is weaker than it has ever been, arguably from within, because support for our system is declining at a moment of increased confrontation with authoritarian powers. And so I think, again, that's another warning light that's blinking red. That, by the way, is not Donald Trump's fault. It predates Donald Trump, probably postdates him, or perhaps he even accelerates that trend as people begin to say, well, look, what is the difference between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? And that is something that is terrifying.